In this episode, I don't want to try to change your mind about what you think the Vikings should do with Adam Thielen and or Harrison Smith. I want to change how you think about it entirely. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another week of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, each and every day. You can also find this show on Amazon Fire or Roku if you download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. And they have a special offer for you, my lovely listeners. Get 10% off of your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. Today on the show, we're talking about Adam Thielen and Harrison Smith. This is not going to be a show where I talk to you about how good those players played or what we can expect from them in 2023 or whether they should be part of the Vikings or whatever. A conversation for another day, and one that is sort of separate from the money conversation, separate but related to, I guess, the money conversation. And so for this one, I don't need you to agree with what I think about Adam Thielen or Harrison Smith. Think whatever you think about them. But their contract situations are a lot more straightforward than I think they look on the surface, and they have very scary numbers on the cap websites that are not going to hold. Those contracts are going to get reworked or cut or whatever, and the way that that's going to happen and the environment that causes it to happen, I think, are a lot different than what you usually hear. These guys, I think the most likely thing is that these two guys are going to take pay cuts this year. And I don't say that because I expect them to have some undying loyalty where they give up millions of dollars just because of how much they love Minnesota. I don't ever expect a player to do that. All right. And you shouldn't either. That's at best anti-labor, at worst, I don't know, just kind of a jerk thing to think. Nobody should sacrifice millions of dollars because they love the fans so much. That's insane. But rather that the economic environment makes it actually a really good decision for these guys monetarily. And to understand why that is, we got to do a little bit of econ. This is an economics thing. And if don't worry, I'm not going to get deep into like supply curves and macroeconomic, whatever. But there's something you probably heard of that's in economics. I've certainly talked about it on this show before because it comes up in a lot of places, called the prisoner's dilemma. The prisoner's dilemma is a very simple thought experiment that can, I think, get your mind oriented in the right way for this kind of decision. So for those who don't understand, let's say that you and I, dear listener, go commit some atrocious crimes, crimes of your choosing. We get caught and we are in the interrogation room and they're trying to get us to confess to our crimes. We don't want to do it, but we're in separate rooms and you don't get to know what I'm saying and I don't get to know what you're saying. All right. Now, the chief of police doesn't have enough evidence to convict us. So if we hold our ground, we can probably get a reduced sentence of about 2 years. If we both confess, it'll be like a 5-year sentence for the crimes that we committed. To get us to confess, the chief of police will say to each of us separately, if you confess, but your partner doesn't, your partner will get 8 years in prison and you'll only get 1. So if you rat me out, you can get 1 year in prison. You put me away for 8 years. And you're also told that I am offered the exact same deal. Now, for YouTube people, I have put this graphic up on the screen because it's a lot of stuff to track. But essentially, the worst thing that can happen is if one of us stays silent and the other doesn't, the one who stays silent gets slapped with all the jail time. If we both rat each other out, we get 5 years. But if we stay silent, they won't have enough to evidence to convict us on anything but 2-year charges. Get it? That's the prisoner's dilemma. Now, why did I bring all this up? If you examine that and you think about it from one person's perspective or the other, you will see that what will actually happen here will be a suboptimal outcome for the two of us. The optimal outcome for the two of us is for both of us to remain silent, because then between the two of us, we only serve 4 years. We each serve 2, and that's that. However, think about it from just your perspective. If you confess, you either get 1 year or 5 years, depending on what I do. If you don't confess, you either get 2 years or 8 years, depending on what I do. So no matter what I do, you remaining silent is worse for you, and confessing is better for you. Therefore, since we both work on the same logic, we're both going to confess and we're both going to get 5 years, which is the worst outcome. We collectively serve 10 years in jail. That's the worst possible outcome, but it's because of the way that we're kind of acting selfishly. That's the prisoner's dilemma. Now, I'm going to bring this to a more related analogy to what Adam Thielen and Harrison Smith are going through. Let's say you work a job. Most of you do. And at that job, let's say you make $100,000 a year. It's a really good job. But most people who make that job only make, let's say, $60,000 a year. So you're way overpaid for your job. You see where I'm headed with this, right? The fiscal year turns over and your boss comes to you and says, look, we can't keep overpaying you like this. Either we want to fire you and go find somebody who will do the same job, but will do it at market rate. However, let's say that because of your experience in that industry, you know that the process of firing you and hiring some other whoever isn't free, right? And any small business owner will be able to tell you this. If you have to train in a new employee, that costs time and resources, which can be kind of converted into a financial cost. They'll probably have to pay you some kind of severance. Let's say all of that stuff combines into $30,000. I'm just trying to keep the math easy here. I know that's like not really realistic. So if your company is going to fire you and hire someone else, they got to pay that someone else $60,000 plus the $30,000 in just like the expenses that it costs to do that. So they're actually only saving $10,000 to do it. Now, they'll still do it because it saves them $10,000, but you are now in this situation where it's going to cost them $90,000 to get rid of you, $100,000 to keep you, and you only get $60,000 if you let all this happen. So what if you came to them and said, well, hey, wait, I've got a better idea. Cut my pay to $80,000. Now, your company is saving more than it would have if it had to fire you and hire a new person and deal with the severance and the training and all that. And you are making more than you would have made on the open market. You're still making $80,000. You're still a little overpaid. But you got out of that situation and they saved more than they would have otherwise. Both sides win here. And the reason I brought up the prisoner's dilemma is to get you thinking in that kind of, there's two perspectives kind of system. There's what you make and what your company makes. Adam Thielen and Harrison Smith are in basically the exact same situation, but the numbers are different. And indeed, there is a middle ground because you can go to your company and in that situation, and you don't have to say $80,000. You could say $89,999, and it would still be in the company's interests to keep you because it saves $1, right? It's the same thing. Or they can come to you and say, well, actually, we'll pay you $60,001. And technically, that's still a better offer for you than what you would get on the open market, right? So there's this big window and then you negotiate, right? And that's the negotiating window. So what we're going to do for the rest of the show is go through Adam Thielen's contract and Harrison Smith's contract and figure out their negotiating windows. Again, this is not a matter of me opining on what these guys are worth or what the Vikings should be paying them. This is more of this is where a pay cut makes sense for both sides. And in a way, it's kind of a prediction of this would be a thing that's like very liable to happen. And and it can happen before the turn of the league year. It doesn't cost any money down the line. It doesn't do anything else to the contract down the line unless you also want to do that. So this is a very logical thing and maybe one of the first things that happens with the Vikings cap. Before we get into that, though, this episode is brought to you by BetterHelp Therapy Online. Therapy is very important. It is not a thing you go to when you have a problem. It's maintenance. To me, it's as important as going to the gym is for maintaining your body. Going to therapy is for maintaining your mind. And I think it's like having a personal trainer for your brain spaces. And that's really important. But a lot of people will start therapy and kind of have one bad experience with someone who just didn't like fit them. And then that'll be it. And they'll say, wow, therapy's not for me. I don't really like it. But really, it might have just been that one person. BetterHelp is a way to help you try out a lot of people. And I really encourage that you do. Find somebody who is right for you. And BetterHelp has a whole system that has matched millions of people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists available 100% online. You get all the benefits of in-person therapy, but if you're not comfortable with that or you just don't want to go to an office, you can do a video chat or a phone call, whatever you're comfortable with. No waiting rooms, no traffic, unless you want to do the in-person thing. That is also available. No waiting rooms, no traffic, just what you want therapy to be. So get unstuck with BetterHelp. Learn more and save 10% off of your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. I also want to talk to you about good old Grambles. It is Super Bowl week, and that means we are inching closer and closer and closer to betting Christmas. That is where FanDuel comes in. You can find all of your favorite fun prop bets, from who will score the first touchdown to the crazy ones like the Gatorade color and all that stuff. All sorts of fun things. And of course, lines, odds, all of the standard spread stuff that you will find, of course, at FanDuel as well. Very excited to be working with FanDuel here at Locked On. And right now, if you download FanDuel, you can bet Super Bowl 57 with a no sweat first bet. You get up to $3,000 in bonus bets if your first bets do not win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and easy to use. And best of all, you get paid your winnings instantly. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon and claim your no sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thanks a million for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. If this stuff is going over your head, if you're not a math person, if you prefer visual aids, and this is a podcast, so I can only do so many visual aids, go to my Patreon page, patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL. This is all free to watch. You don't have to sign up or anything. Go watch the salary cap video. It was the latest thing posted on there. It's about 20 minutes long, and by the end of it, you should have a much better appreciation for how contracts are made and how the system works. Please go watch it. I counted beans and also instructed you on how to cook beans. So let's get into Adam Thielen's contract. So I've whipped up a handy little graphic here on how Adam Thielen's contract has to work. So right now, on Adam Thielen's current deal, he is taking home $12 million in salary. It's like 11.8. I did a lot of rounding on this graphic, so the numbers aren't exact. Don't freak out. I'm trying to make it as easy as possible for mental math here. So I did some rounding, and it's not 100% accurate. Go to overthecap.com if you want the real numbers. His current deal, though, he's taking home about $12 million. And the Vikings are paying, thanks to prorated bonuses and stuff like that, about $19 million on the cap. So those are too big of numbers, right? If the Vikings were to cut him, now remember, this is the same thing as you're making $100,000, and if you get fired, you make about $60,000. That's what the job is worth, right? So that's what you would make if you went and got that same job with another company. Same deal with Thielen. What would he make on the open market? Now, for this graphic, I have estimated it'd be about $4 million. And where I got that number, that could be way off base, by the way. I am not that good at guessing contracts. And the point of this is not to say, here's what the numbers actually are. This is just an example to show you how the system works. If it turns out that a team is willing to pay him $10 million on the open market, he should probably go to the open market. But looking at a contract from a couple years ago, which was AJ Green's, very similar situation, had some health issues, aging receiver with a very prolific pass, that kind of thing. Seems like a similar-ish situation. He made, I think, about 2% of the cap in 2021, which was not nearly as much as it would be now, but I went with percentage of the cap to account for how much bigger the cap is now than it was 2 years ago. That would equal about $4 million if he got the AJ Green deal. Now, again, you might disagree with that. You might think, well, Thielen's worth more than that, or maybe he's worth less than that because he's older. Whatever you think, it's fine. Substitute in your own numbers. I just want to show you how the system works. If the Vikings cut Adam Thielen, though, they would pay $13.5 million in dead cap. Now, they can designate him post-June to kick about half of that into 2024 and split it up, but they still got to pay it. And whether they do it all at once or in over 2 years is an option that they have. So, can we find a deal where Adam Thielen, because he ain't getting the $12 million he gets on his current deal, right? The best thing for Adam Thielen is for nothing to happen with his contract, but because he costs $19 million on the salary cap, the Vikings probably can't do that. So that first column of this little chart, the keep him and the contract is as it stands, is a comparison point. It's not actually really an option. If you release him, he gets $4 million and the Vikings pay $13.5 million in dead cap. So is there a world where we can redo this contract where the Vikings have a cap hit under $13.5 million and Thielen is making more than $4 million or whatever you think the number was, right? Well, if it's $4 million, then yes, absolutely. The version of this is the lowest it can be. Let's say you go up to Adam Thielen and you say, well, you think you get $4 million on the open market? I'll give you 4.5. I'll do better than what you think you'll get there. I'll give you 4.5 and we'll cut the rest of your salary. And then if you want to void out the rest of your year so you can walk next year and be a free agent on your own terms, then fine, we can also talk about that. Kind of a moot point for what I'm talking about here, though. So do with that or don't, whatever. But we'll just say that's your pay cut, right? We just got Adam Thielen to take a $7.5 million pay cut, and it probably was good for him to do that versus hitting the open market, right? Now, here is a version that's a little higher that is the highest that this could be, right? Because if Thielen comes to the Vikings and says, well, what if you cut my salary to $6 million? It costs you guys $13 million because of all the prorated bonuses. And that's still $500,000 lower than it would be if you cut me. And I still make $6 million. That is also a deal that benefits both sides. The Vikings save $6 million on their cap in total, right? From the 19 to 13. So you say it would be reported as that Thielen agreed to a pay cut of $6 million. Thielen still does better than he would have on the open market. And that's the end of things. The Vikings just conjured $6 million of cap space out of thin air. They didn't borrow it from future years. They didn't do any of that. Now, the problem is if you think Adam Thielen will make $10 million on the open market, I think Brad Spielberger said that Alan Lazard will make about $11 million. Let's say Adam Thielen thinks he's going to make that. He's going to be on, in that market rate. Then it probably behooves Adam Thielen to say, yeah, thanks for everything, but I'm hitting the market because if you guys don't want to pay me this 12, I can get most of that on the open market, right? And if he thinks that, then he goes and no hard feelings, right? That's economics, that's the business. So what I want you to understand, and I don't want you to come freak out at me because I got the numbers wrong or whatever. What I want you to understand is that Thielen has to think that he is going to make more than $6.5 million on the open market for a pay cut to be a bad idea for him. If he thinks he will make less, then a pay cut is a good idea for him. And I have no idea what Adam Thielen thinks he's going to make on the open market. I have no idea what Adam Thielen actually is going to make on the open market. That is not my forte. But just understand that's where the limit has to be. And anything else, if he says, oh, I'll cut my salary down to $2 million because I love being in Minnesota and my kids are here and I love the facility and blah, 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 he's doing it out of the kindness of his heart. But I want to stress that this pay cut isn't Adam Thielen acting out of the kindness of his heart. This is Adam Thielen acting purely in his own self-interest, which he should do and which we should applaud him doing, right? Workers act in their own self-interest, employers act in their own self-interest. That's America. And acting in his own self-interest, short of finding a way to blackmail the Vikings into keeping him on his current deal, the most money Adam Thielen has access to is with a renegotiation, unless the free market likes him a lot more than I think they do, which is totally possible. So let's do the same thing, but with Harrison Smith, and then we'll see what kind of money we can save here, where our windows are. But first, there's a bit of a special day coming up, isn't there? And I'm not talking about Super Bowl Sunday. I'm talking about Valentine's Day. Fellas, especially, all right? Don't forget. And maybe you're looking for something very nice for that special someone, for your partners, fellas, or other such. You might be looking for a special gift. BlueNile.com is where you can find the perfect piece of jewelry to be that gift for a special moment, an engagement, Valentine's Day, or just celebrating each other because you love each other. Their simple online tools let you choose diamond shape, size, cut, clarity, all sorts of other things, and they have experts that can guide you with in-depth educational materials to help you figure out what decisions you're making and whether or not that's right for your partner and the gift that you want to give. And Blue Nile's diamond price guarantee allows you to compare a competitor's diamond against one of theirs. Blue Nile can even meet or beat their price. Speaking of acting in your own self-interest. Every order is insured and arrives quickly in a discreet package that won't give the game away, and shipping is free, and so are returns. Right now, you can save up to 50% as well at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com for up to 50% off. BlueNile.com. All right, we're keeping it going on the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's do the same thing with Harrison Smith. On Harrison Smith's current contract, the Vikings are on the hook for about $19 million in 2022. That is their cap hit. Harrison Smith's actual take-home money will be about $15 million. Again, there's prorated bonus stuff going on that inflates the cap hit from restructures and stuff. If you cut Harrison Smith, again, because of prorated bonus, and they've done some void year things, a lot of cap accelerates, and the Vikings will still pay $12 million in dead cap if they just outright cut Harrison Smith. Harrison Smith, I have no idea what he gets on the open market. I looked again at Brad Spielberger's projections and saw Adrian Amos projected to get $5.5 million. Now, he's a little younger than Harrison Smith, but Harrison Smith was a little more prolific, so call that a wash. Again, it's not really about this estimate being accurate. It's just, we got to put a number here, so we'll go with that. We'll go with $5.5 million, and that's what he's supposed to get on the open market. So the Vikings would pay $12 million, and Harrison Smith on the open market gets $5.5 million, I guess. So what renegotiation can we do that means that Harrison Smith gets more than that $5.5 million? Well, what if we go to him and we say, well, we'll give you $6 million in base salary. That would cost $10 million on the cap for Harrison Smith. And he would get $6 million in base salary. And if Harrison Smith doesn't think he can beat that on the open market, he'll take the deal, and he will be getting more money than he would have if he stubbornly left, right? Anything lower than that, again, that would require him to do stuff out of the kindness of his own heart that I don't think we can responsibly expect. And on the high end of this deal, Harrison Smith can go up to the Vikings and say, how about you give me $7.5 million so that your cap hit is $11.5 million. And technically it could be like 11,999,999, but we'll say $500,000 just to keep the mental math easy, right? So the Vikings still save $500,000 more than if they cut Harrison Smith. They get a $7.5 million cap credit here. And Harrison Smith still makes $7.5 million, which is way better than he thinks he can do on the open market. And there's your negotiating window from 5.5 to 7.5. The Vikings saving somewhere between $7.5 and $9.5 million. I will stress one more time, because I know people freak out about this when you talk about pay cuts. The Vikings are not asking these two players to do this out of the kindness of their heart. They're not asking them to do this out of a sense of loyalty to Minnesota. They're not saying, but look how much you love your friends and blah, blah, blah. This isn't a personal decision. It's an impartial one that just means they make more money. So where does everybody make more money? We're doing prisoner's dilemma, cold, dispassionate economics here. But if you tally all that up, let's take the optimistic scenarios here for the Vikings, where Harrison Smith makes $6 million and the Vikings pay $10 million in on the cap. So you've saved $9 million via Harrison Smith, and you've saved, in the same vein, you've saved $7.5 million via Adam Thielen's contract. Again, you put no money into next year. You didn't do any kicking of the can down the road. You just kind of leverage the economics of the situation to get some cap hits down. And by the way these contracts were structured, you can see this coming 3 years ago and use it as a way to kind of get them to agree to it and say, and then we'll go back to the negotiating table in 2023. You can plan for this stuff. That's the real secret. But in all of that, what is that? $16.5 million the Vikings saved with the stroke of a pen, essentially, and ceding no other resources except maybe some political capital with these 2-star players who are probably not going to be on your team for more than the next couple years anyways, right? That is like, there's not really a person that loses here too much, so long as everyone negotiates in good faith and that nothing goes sour interpersonally, which I'll never be able to speak to. That's what I think happens here. I think 16.5 or somewhere in there $1 million gets made just by reworking these 2 contracts. And I think both players, if they're able to be impartial and not be emotional about it, which if they are emotional about it, that's 100% understandable. Or if they just believe in themselves more, right? If they just say, no, I think I can do better than $7 million on the open market, I'm going to take that. If those 2 players don't think that, then this can happen. And even if they do think that, you can still maybe eke a little bit out of it. That's part of the big, like a huge reason why I'm not panicking about the Vikings cap space, because that brings them down to a very reasonable place. They're like $7-ish million over. They haven't done a single restructure or extension or cut or anything. And a lot of that pressure gets relieved. So I hope this made sense to you. If you struggled on the audio, if you're an audio listener and you struggled here, I encourage you to go watch on YouTube, where I've got graphics up that have all this stuff in front of you, and maybe a visual aid will help. If not, send me a question. If you got any questions on this, send it to me at Luke Brown NFL or at Locked On Vikings, or any questions about the Vikings, because it's Twitter Tuesday tomorrow. So send me that, or lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com if you've got something longer, or fill out the Google form in the show notes if you prefer to do that. I will talk to you all tomorrow with Twitter Tuesday. And as always, Skol.